Well, my dog died last week. I didn't like that. I mean, I know, like, that's probably not real profound. In fact, it's kind of a cliche. We've all probably heard that joke, like somebody looks like they're sad. You're like, whoa, what happened to you? Your dog died? Like, you've heard that joke? Not just me? Okay, maybe it's an Indiana thing. I've heard that joke a lot. Like, I've heard that joke, a lot growing up. Like, that's a whole thing. It's like a whole cliche that, like, your dog dies and then you're sad. Like, you're not supposed to like that. And that's true, essentially, no matter how you feel about your dog, no matter what it is. But I like to think, and I know everybody will say this, but I like to think that my dog who died, his name was Griffey, I'd like to think that it was a little bit of a special dog in my life. Like, I'm going to have dogs my whole life. I had dogs growing up. I'm probably never going to not have a dog, but Griffey was born a couple of months before I graduated college. Which means, like, he was, tiny little puppy when I was a tiny little puppy. Like, he kind of grew up and became like a real dog as I, grew up and kind of became a real adult-ish. I was potty training him when I was trying to figure out, okay, how do you pay bills? And he was learning not to run in the street. About the time I was learning, hey, you have to mow your lawn or the city of Ashland will give you a ticket, and it's too darn hot out here, I don't want to mow. That doesn't work. We kind of grew together, is the point. And so through, my entirety of being a young adult, my entirety of being, moving to Ashland and getting married and, beginning to do ministry and, really doing all that, Griffey was kind of the one constant, like he was just always there. You show up at the front door and he's wagging his tail, the dumb look on his face, because, he was dumb. And, you just have that whole thing, and that's just, he's kind of a constant presence in your life. And it's weird because, it's also funny, like, I don't want to speak too much out of turn here, but, like, y'all are married. How, like, when you're married, sometimes it doesn't go well? Well, that's not the case with a dog. So, like, Stephanie and I get married, and it's like, well, we're not always getting along, but, like, I get along with him just fine. I discovered that. Like, Griffey was the dog that helped me discover why we call, dogs man's best friend, They're not going to argue with you over all the stupid things that you don't want to argue about, but somehow you do. I mean, it's amazing. So Griffey, that was Griffey for me. That was a big thing. And so, when he died, man, that was sad. I didn't like that. But I'll also say, speaking of things I didn't like, he didn't die of natural causes. I had him euthanized. We had him euthanized. And I didn't like that either. That was not fun. And I'll tell you partly why I didn't like that. So I got into, as Griffey got old, he was 14 when we said goodbye. And so when this whole thing happened, we were looking at, how do you do this? Where do you do this? When do you do this? And I just started, doing what anybody does in 2020. I just started looking on the internet. Just looking at articles. I think, hey, Stephanie, I read this article was the thing that I said most for about 6 weeks as I was trying to figure out, how do we do this? And I came across this one article. And this one article was written by a vet who was trying to, I don't know what was helpful about this article, but they were trying to be helpful. And this vet was writing and said, okay, don't worry. It's normal when you euthanize your dog to feel like you're murdering a member of your family. That was the exact terminology. Murder, member, family. And I'm not going to lie to you, I actually didn't think that at all. I hadn't considered that I was murdering a member of my family. And then I read an article that told me I was murdering a member of my family, and you know what I started feeling? Like I was murdering a member of my family. Like, suddenly that made me feel bad. Because, like, I was thinking, okay, well, we just, we're doing this for all the different reasons. We're doing it and all of that. But what was interesting was, like, I never really thought about it in terms of, like, oh, no, I'm going to go to a doctor and say, please kill my dog for me. I never thought of it in those terms, and then I realized that's exactly what I'm doing. Like, we have these nice words for it, these niceties, but that's what we do. So, like, literally, it was a couple weeks now, it'll be 2 weeks this past Tuesday. Like, literally, we woke up in the morning, and he was alive, and then by the end of the day, in the afternoon even, he wasn't. And that was my fault. And I didn't like that. And I know, like, we did it for a reason. Okay, like, he's 14, riddled with cancer. I mean, there's tumors on the inside, outside. I mean, he was in pain all the time. Like, his breathing was all ragged. Like, he was in rough shape. But, you know, there were also days where suddenly it was 2013 again. And that was weird. That was weird for us. Because, like, yeah, we would like, okay, what are we doing with this dog? You know, hey, when do we say goodbye? And then suddenly, you know, he takes, you know, charging down the hallway, running around in a circle. Like, he's all super happy, and it's all fine. So, man, it was just so hard to decide, okay, we've made, you know, obviously we have to do this, you know, responsible dog ownership and responsible, you know, dog being friends with the dog means that, you know, like, you're there with them for the various stages of life. I get that. But man, it was just really, really hard to decide when and all of that, and I just hated it. And I still, honestly, I think that's what gets me more than anything was, like, the doubt of if I did that correctly. Like, did I wait too long? Like, we tried to, you know, make that decision because I love this dog, and I'm trying to, you know, the same love we had with him for 14 years, I tried to, you know, put that into, saying goodbye, but, you know, you just don't know because you think, well, man, did I just murder a member of my family? So anyway, so we do this, and Griffey has moved on to, you know, whatever's next for animals. And so we are coming home, and I do the only thing that makes sense. I make a Facebook post, and Instagram, Facebook and Instagram, because it's 2020, which means nothing in life actually happens unless you document it on Facebook and Instagram. Those are the rules now. Like, I don't even think marriages are valid unless you post a picture of you on your wedding day and say hashtag blessed, and then hashtag, and you put something dumb with your names together, crammed together. Like, it's not even legal. I'm pretty sure it was a new law, and that's not the way that works. So, I posted something on Facebook, and I put all these pictures, and I write this little thing, and that's what I do. And that's when an odd thing started happening. People started, like, you know, offering their condolences. And I guess if you'd ask, hey, Drew, what do you think is going to happen if I do this? You know, I assumed, you know, people would, you know, say something nice. But what was weird about the nice things that were being said were who it was coming from. So the first person who said something was this girl I went to high school with. She's not a girl now. We're 35. That's depressing to say. We're 35, this adult woman that I knew when we were children. But the weird thing about this person is, like, we weren't friends in high school. I mean, not because she was, you know, like, a jerk or anything. I just, you know, we just weren't friends. Like, you just run in different circles. Somehow we add each other on Facebook, like, 10 years ago. I haven't spoken to this girl in 10 years since we add each other on Facebook. I don't know that I spoke to her then. I didn't speak to her in high school. I have not a clue why this person is talking to me. And yet within, like, a second and a half of me making my post, she posts something. A few down, then, there's this guy that he's a Reds fan. And we became friends through Reds internet forums, because, shut up. All right, so we became friends through Reds internet forums. And we were friends for a while, and then we got into, like, a Reds-related fight. Man, when I wrote this, I didn't think how it was going to sound. We got into an internet fight about a very bad baseball team we both watch. And we had this falling out, and he hasn't spoken to me in like 4 years. Because we're all adults. This guy's like 50. I'm 35. It's great. He posts something within like 30 seconds. Like, suddenly he is saying something about this whole thing. All these people, like there was a couple people I literally had to click on their profile to make sure I was friends with them. I don't know if this happens to you guys on Facebook, but like you end up friends with people and you have no idea when or where. And it's just like, I did not add you, and I don't remember you adding me, but now you've said sorry about your loss for your dog, and I'm just going to like that. So that happened, and it was weird because, like, it wasn't like I expected, people that, are in my life that I talk to regularly. I expected, those people to text or call or whatever, and not that anybody had to, but that would have been my expectation. But in this case, these were people that I don't know or barely know, or people I would have never expected in a million years to reach out, and they did. And then a weird thing happened. I went to the doctor, and the lady at the desk that you pay at the end said, "Oh, I'm so sorry that your dog died." Oh, we've never spoken about dogs or my life outside of, like, my liver and go get that blood work. I don't know how she knew, but she's, like, tearing up talking to me about this. And I have no idea what's happening at all. And so I got to thinking about it, because I got to thinking about this whole situation. The story is going somewhere, I swear. I think it's interesting that all these different people, I had the people in my life that, I assumed, would cared. But then all these other people, they cared, and I didn't expect them to. And I was trying to figure out, okay, why is that the way that is? Why do these people care? Why is this, why is this enough to end a Cold War? Why is this enough, to speak to somebody from high school for the first time in, 20 years? Why this? And I clicked on a few people, and what I discovered is they all had dogs. It's really simple. They all had dogs. They've all lost dogs. Or, either they've, lost dogs, they've gone through the same thing that I've gone through, or they, have dogs, and they can imagine what it would be like to go through what I'm going through, and they don't want to do that. There's something to the idea of common pain. There's something to the idea of going through a negative situation, a traumatic situation, a situation that's no fun, and I understand. Those of you guys who don't have pets are like, "Drew, it's a dog, settle down." And to a degree, that's fair. But then anybody with a dog is like, that's not fair at all. They're dogs. There's something to, regardless of dog or anything else, there's something to going through what somebody else has also gone through, whether, any kind of loss, any kind of pain, any kind of suffering. There's just something to that kind of binds people together, almost in a more powerful way than common joy. It's interesting that our common pain will bind us together and make us feel closer and make us feel like more like family or friends or, this kindred thing, more so even than we both like the same things, or we both love, we both are fans of this, or we're both that, or we both experience that good thing. And that leads me, of course, to Jesus. Because the cross was bad. The cross was painful, and Jesus didn't like it. And I really think that despite, how many times we watch that Mel Gibson movie, we still sometimes get it wrong about Jesus. Like, I think sometimes we think Jesus' death on the cross, Jesus dies as, like, super God-man, and, like, he's going through the motions of stuff. He's going through the motions of whatever, but he's God, he's fine. And I think the truth of the matter is when we really, just stop and take a second to think about, okay, Jesus dies on the cross. And so much of church history has so many people have tried to figure out, okay, what exactly does that mean? Exactly what is the purpose? All of these, atonement theories and everything. When we think about, what it actually meant that he died, he suffered in basically every possible way. We always think about the physical thing, right? I already referenced the Mel Gibson movie. That's the whole focus of that movie is, crucifixion is a painful thing. We're talking about the physical act of driving nails into a person's wrist, driving nails into a person's feet, hanging them on a couple of pieces of wood, and letting them die of, just die out in the elements. There's a lot of reasons you might die, suffocation, starvation, whatever. It's a whole other conversation. But it's bad. Like, nobody wants to do that. That hurts. That's a really bad way to die. And that's, of course, after, the arrest and the trial and the beatings and all of that. It physically hurt. But I think if we, I mean, it's easy for me to say because like I've never had somebody stick, nails in my wrists, but it feels like the physical hurt is actually probably in third place if we're ranking the hurts of the cross. I think in second place is probably the emotional hurt. I mean, Jesus is crucified. Jesus is nailed to the cross because one of his very best friends betrays him. And again, I know in our heads, we've got hindsight, the benefit of 2,000 years of hindsight. I don't know that we really consider the relationship and the brotherhood that for 3 years Jesus and Judas had. Judas was not this snake who's, from the very beginning, he, weasels his way into the group and he's just a fake. We know the scriptures teach us he was like everyone else. He was one of Jesus' closest friends. He was a disciple. He did have a ministry. Judas did amazing, wonderful, beautiful things for years during Jesus' ministry. They were close as anyone else. And so for Judas to do what he did, however he did it, however he did it, again, we've spent 2,000 years arguing about exactly what that is. But whatever the case is, we've all been betrayed by a friend before. Imagine being betrayed literally to death by one of your best friends that you have lived with for 3 years. But see, that's not even a half of it. You see, the scriptures teach us that Jesus came, God becomes a man, and then comes and teaches people who God is. That's really the core of what Jesus is entirely about, is showing us God. Jesus shows us God. And so Jesus becomes a man, God becomes a man, Jesus shows us God, and he shows us love and mercy and kindness and grace. And God reaches out to people and says, here is a better way to live. Here's a better way of going about things. This is who I am. This is how much I love you. This is what life can be if you trust me, if you follow me. The act of becoming a person by God is a gift of grace. And to that grace, the very people he came to love wanted him dead. Again, we don't think about this very often. Maybe we do, but we should think about it more often. The Pharisees are Jesus' enemies only from one side. Jesus does not consider the Pharisees his enemies. The Pharisees are people he loves that he wants to save. The Romans are not Jesus' enemies from two sides. The Romans, they end up killing Jesus. But Jesus, he doesn't see the Romans as enemies. He sees the Romans as people that he loves, that he wants to save. All Jesus wants is to do good. And all he gets in return is rejection, pain, and being murdered. Like they made up capital crimes for him and then killed him. Even if the cross didn't hurt, the emotional trauma of that moment is profound. But even then, I'm not sure that's in the first spot. I think the most painful thing about the cross, we read in the Apostle Paul's second letter to the church in Corinth. Here's what we read. It should be behind me. It says this. It says, "For our sake, God made him to be sin who knew no sin, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God." For our sake, God made him to be sin who knew no sin. Listen, that's a confusing phrase. In a lot of other translations, they'll try to clean it up and well, they interpret it for you, and we shouldn't do that. The phrase simply says this: Jesus never sinned. Okay? Jesus does not know sin, and that's really significant because sin is stuff that hurts. A really handy, easy, not perfect, but handy definition for what sin is anything that hurts. Sin is that which hurts us. Sin is that which hurts other people. When people sin, people hurt. Okay? So sin hurts. But Jesus has never sinned. Jesus never did sin, which means any hurt or offense or whatever that Jesus gave was solely on the other party. Jesus never hurt other people by sinning. Jesus never hurt himself by sinning. Jesus never sins. And yet, at the cross, God made Jesus to be sin, even though Jesus never felt sin. Imagine, we're all used to sin. We're all used to doing real dumb stuff that hurts. All of us. We're real good at it. But imagine you're not. Imagine that unique feeling has never been felt. And now imagine you take on the pain of all of humanity's sins and you become sin. Again, I'm not doing a good job of explaining this. I'll be honest, I don't know that anybody can. But spiritually speaking, what we have to understand is that at a spiritual core level, what happened on the cross for Jesus, aside from anything emotional, aside from anything physical, it all hurt spiritually. There was a sinful pain Jesus felt as he bore the brunt and the weight of everything that we do to hurt ourselves and each other. The cross hurt, and Jesus didn't like it. And it's really important that we say that out loud, but it's also very important that we understand that that is not unique. The cross is not unique in that regard. You see, Jesus' whole life, I don't want to be too much of a downer here, but Jesus' whole life really, from a certain vantage point, can be defined by suffering. Jesus did not have an amazing life. I think he had a happy life. I think he was just fine. But Jesus was not shielded from the suffering in this world. So we know from the start, Jesus is in poverty. Jesus is very, very poor. There are 7 social economic classes in the ancient Greco-Roman world that the Jews found themselves oppressed by. When Jesus is born, he's number 6 or 7, depending on how you want to look at it. He and his family are low on the totem pole, which means Jesus knew what it was like to go to bed hungry. Jesus knew what it was like to outgrow clothing that couldn't be replaced yet. Jesus knew what it was like to see other people have things that he knew he couldn't, and wonder why. Jesus knew what it was like to be a part of a family that worked and worked and worked and worked and worked, working 10 times as hard as other people for less reward. Jesus lived in poverty. And then, Jesus lost his father. We don't know when, but we know that Joseph just disappears in the biblical record. He's just gone. Which, by the way, that means he died. Which means the man that raised Jesus for 10, 12, 13, 14, we don't know how many years. At least 12, we know. But, Jesus loses his father. Any of you who have lost a parent know what that's like. You know how terrible and how defining that can be for your life. Jesus went through that as a young man. And we also know, I don't want to pick on Jesus here, but remember that Lazarus story? We know when Jesus loses, Jesus doesn't like death. He doesn't handle death well. Jesus is good at a lot of stuff, but Jesus is very bad at handling death. We know that for the Bible. So, that's when he's, 30, he's bad at handling death. What would it be like when he was, 13 and his dad dies? Jesus knew what it was like to suffer loss. Jesus knew what it was like to be rejected by family then. Again, we talked about this a few weeks ago. Mary and Jesus' brothers, they try to stop Jesus from doing his ministry. Jesus is out trying to do what he knows he should be doing, and his family is arguing with him. Jesus knew what it was like to be rejected by the people who should have known him best. And one of the very first sermons we see in the Bible is Jesus goes to his hometown. He preaches a sermon. At the end of that sermon, they literally try to kill him. And not just a little bit. They take him to the edge of a cliff, and they're going to throw him off. It was not a sermon that went well. is what I'm trying to say. I've had a lot of people not like what I preach. No one's ever tried to throw me off a cliff. That happens to Jesus very early on. He understands that kind of rejection. Maybe most of all, I think one of the sadder stories in the New Testament that we almost never call sad is there's a story in the book of John where Jesus, at this point, okay, he's past his hometown, he's past his family, he's preaching, he's teaching, and just so many people are now out following him. I mean, just the idea is like hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people are listening to him teach, are wanting to follow him. And so he preaches another sermon. And in this sermon, he gives this illustration that actually is just communion. He gives this illustration that he's going to, give to us forever with communion. He talks about, eating body and blood, his body and blood. And everyone except for the 12 disciples leaves. I mean, imagine. You've got this amazing success. This wonderful, okay, there's so many people now. It's finally happening. And then you preach a sermon and the whole thing collapses. I mean, Jesus understood what it was like to fail. Jesus understood what it was like. I mean, in every way a person can hurt, Jesus felt it. And I think maybe as an easy catch-all, I think we should recognize just one piece of one story, okay? So one of the most famous stories of Jesus is when Jesus is tempted by Satan in the wilderness, okay? We remember this story. Jesus goes, he listens to this prophet. This prophet's name is John. John is teaching, he's preaching, he's baptizing. Jesus says, hey, I like that. I'm all about that. Jesus gets baptized. He's ready to go into ministry, and the Holy Spirit tells Jesus, go out into the wilderness and fast. So for 40 days and for 40 nights, Jesus fasts. And he is all by himself, and he is not eating, and he is, doing what you do when you fast. He's praying, he's trying to focus on God, he's trying to do all this. But after, a month and 10 days here, or maybe a month and 9 days, depending which month, or 12 days, depending which month. Did you know February is 29 days this month? I had no idea. Last night, a friend of mine explained what a leap year was to me. I'm 35, guys. No one should be listening to me. Where was I? So for 40 days, he's out fasting. Like a month and some change. Should have just started there. And so he's hungry and he's weak and it's difficult. It's a problem. And so we're told that Satan comes and tempts him. And what's interesting about the temptations is it's, you watch movies, you watch TV, and it's not like, Satan shows up and he's like, rob the bank or go burn down the orphanage. Like that's what Satan usually does, like in movies or TV. But in the scriptures, in the story, that's not what it is. It's real subtle stuff. It's, hey, Jesus, you're real hungry. Why don't you make some bread, and then you're not hungry anymore? Like you can do miracles. You're God's son, right? And then there's another time where he's like, hey, look, are you sure you're God's son? I know, you think that. You're pretty sure you're God's son and you're special, but what if you're not? Why don't you test it? And then if God comes through, then you'll be good forever, and you'll definitely know, and you'll never have to question that. And then the end he says, okay, I'll tell you what I do. You want to save everybody. You want everybody to see you as king. I'll tell you what, I'll just do it for you. I'll just force them to follow you. What about that? The temptations were real subtle. Obviously, when you think it through, it's that's not good. But it's subtle, and for a guy who hasn't eaten in 40 days, and a guy who, is probably aware of how hard the future's going to be, it's real tempting. But Jesus resists. He wins. And that's that. And this is what we read in the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 4. We read this. When the devil finished tempting Jesus, he left him until the next opportunity came. Speaking of things I should have known before, somehow I've just always refer to the Matthew part of this. Matthew tells the story, and the way Matthew tells the story, okay, so Satan is tempting Jesus, and Jesus wins, and the angels show up, and they help Jesus, and everything's good, and then he goes right into his ministry, and we never hear from Satan again, basically, in Matthew. Luke, though, tells it entirely differently. The way Matthew tells it, it's almost like, hey, this is like a one-time prize fight. You know, Jesus, he's tested, he has a fight, he wins, and now he's ready for ministry. Luke says Satan leaves him until the next time. Meaning that there was a next time, and a next time, and a next time, and a next time. Which means probably there was a last time also, and a last time, and a last time. What we're seeing is not one battle spiritually between Jesus and Satan. What we're seeing is one round of a fight that lasts the entirety of Jesus' ministry and life. Satan never left Jesus alone. And no matter how we understand Satan, no matter how you personally may define that, I mean, Satan's bad. Satan never leaving a person alone, that produces suffering. That's bad. Jesus was oppressed spiritually, at least his entire ministry. And so at the end of the day, the cross, while it's this defining moment, we've been talking for the last couple of weeks about how the cross is how we see God. You know, Paul wanted us to think, okay, when you think of God, who God is, you should think of Jesus on the cross. When we say, hey, what do I think about with God? We think of Christ crucified, right? But the cross is really just the culmination of an entire life in which Jesus suffered, and Jesus hurt, and Jesus struggled physically, emotionally, spiritually, for all sorts of different reasons. And that begs the question, why? Like, why would Jesus do that? I mean, like, there's nothing. When we say, okay, God wants to save us, God does save us through Christ. Okay, what that means, as we've been discussing, is that Jesus, God becomes a man, Jesus shows us God, shows us the gospel, shows us what heaven on earth is supposed to be like, God's will, all that stuff, shows us the definition of God, and then saves us from sin, death, darkness, evil, Satan, ourselves, all of that at the cross. Got it? Cool, good. But none of that means that Jesus can't be like a sheik, like a king somewhere first, right? Like, why couldn't Jesus just, have a little cushier life? Why does Jesus have to live in poverty? It doesn't mean that, one of his parents has to die when he's, a teenager. Why does that have to happen? Why does Jesus have to be rejected by everyone? Why do the religious people that Jesus came to save have to hate him? Why couldn't God just, just at the end of the day, Israel is an occupied nation by the most brutal empire in the history of the world. Why be born then? Why not just be born 50 years one way or the other of the Roman Empire? I think a question has to be asked, why does Jesus suffer the way he does when he absolutely didn't have to? He could save people and do his entire mission and not suffer. So why suffer? The book of Hebrews, I think, tells us. The book of Hebrews chapter 4 tells us this very thing about Jesus. We read, "So then, since we have a great high priest who has entered heaven, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold firmly to what we believe. This high priest of ours understands our weaknesses, for he faced all of the same testings we do, yet he did not sin. So let us come boldly to the throne of our gracious God. There we will receive his mercy, and we will find grace to help us when we need it most." I think Jesus suffered because we suffer. I think Jesus suffered because at the end of the day, God needed, or at least wanted, to understand. God wanted to understand what it's like to be us. Jesus is tempted in everything. Jesus understands our weakness. Jesus suffers the way we suffer. And because of that, when we go to God and we are suffering, when we go to God and we need help, when we go to God and we need mercy and grace, we're not speaking to this far-off deity that made us and doesn't understand and doesn't know what it's like and has no clue what we're going through. We're speaking to the creator of the universe who became one of us and said, now I know. Now I get it. Which is to say, Jesus had a dog. And so when we say, hey, I lost my dog today, Jesus is the first one saying, I'm so sorry. I love you and I'm here for you. Can we go to lunch? Jesus understands our weaknesses. Our pain is not belittled. Our pain is not minimized. Jesus felt it. And I dare say, Jesus feels it. You see, the entirety of the gospel can be boiled down to God is with us. We learn that at Christmas. We probably should be talking about it more than just Christmas, but God is with us. When we go through hurt, God goes through that hurt with us. When we suffer, God suffers with us. Because at the end of the day, if we define God by the cross, what we learn is that the God that made us, the God that we love, the God that loves us, the God that we serve, that is a God who is willing to suffer with us, for us, and always. So we're in our third week of our series called God Is. And as we finish this very brief conversation about the cross, we talked for 5 weeks about what God is not. We've talked about 3 weeks for what God is. We're putting those things together, hopefully getting a healthy, non-toxic view of who God is and how we live with him. And as we finish this whole idea, for now at least, nothing's ever finished, but as we finish this whole series, we talk about the nature of God as we see on the cross. We see a God that undeniably is willing to suffer. And so our third lesson is this. God suffers. So he understands and is with us when we suffer pain in this world. God suffers. So he understands and is with us when we suffer pain in this world. I think it's interesting. We began this whole thing 8 weeks ago talking about different religions. 18,000, or 18 major religions, 40,000 denominations. Just so many different ideas about God. And every religion since like day one. I mean, we talked a couple weeks ago about sacrifice. 6,000 years ago, you have the Egyptians offering sacrifices to the gods. I mean, we're all trying to deal with this concept that we suffer, that we hurt, that pain happens. And where is God in that? What is God's role? Is God causing it? Is God not causing it? Is it punishment? Is it God just allowing it? Is it all these different things? And we come up with all these different ideas. But I think if we look at the cross, we come up with the healthiest way of answering that question, of what is God's role in the pain in the world? Where is God when we hurt? And the answer very simply is God is with us. And he's hurting too. And look, there's going to be, I'm sure there's somebody's going to listen to this online and be like, it's not theologically accurate. I don't know. That happens. Jesus only suffered once on the cross. I get that. I know. But when we look at the nature of God and the cross and his life, we see a God that is willing to suffer, and we understand that God is with us. I cannot imagine that as we suffer that God is not right there with us, feeling the same feelings, comforting us, helping us. It's the same reason why somebody I haven't talked to since high school, why somebody I had a falling out with over the dumb baseball team I watch, why all the lady at the doctor's office, why all these people are reaching out to me. Because you see, we're not alone in our suffering. We're not alone in our pain. And when it comes to Christ, Christ has gone through everything we could go through. And he understands. There's just a lot of times we have questions. And I think a really healthy thing as we finish this, put a bow in this whole series, we get these questions about, what does God do in this case, or how is God in that case, or where is God here? I think if we can look to the cross and see, man, Jesus was willing to go through all of that. I think sometimes we look, like, I referenced it a couple of times. I watched that Mel Gibson movie, and I remember it was so sad. And it was, when I was younger, it was very sad. But as we understand it, there's nothing sad about the cross. I mean, there's really not. That is God showing solidarity with us, saying, I am willing to be you. So that way, you always can come to me. Man, that's beautiful. And we don't have all the answers to all of life's questions. We don't know why bad things happen. We don't know. I mean, we can say here, 40,000 denominations, 18 religions. We don't understand who God is a lot of the time. But if we recognize that God is a God who is willing to suffer, to be like us, to be with us, so we can turn to him, then no matter what is happening, no matter what questions we may have, at the end of the day, there is always good news in Christ and Christ crucified. So the musicians are going to come forward. They're going to sing a song. We offer an invitation each and every week. Take God up on his offer of this whole thing as he embraces. He says, hey, the cross, I've loved you, I've forgiven you, I've done all of these things. And for you now, follow me. The Bible teaches that when we do that, we're to repent to be baptized. That sounds like two things. I promise you it's just one. As we repent, we turn our backs on who we used to be. We say, I want a new way. I want a new life. In baptism, we are born again in an allegorical, metaphorical kind of a way. We go down to the water. It's like our old selves being put to death. We get out of the water. It's our new selves being born again. We were promised God's forgiveness. We were promised God's Spirit. We were promised God's presence. And we were promised we were never alone, no matter what we suffer. If you're doing this, we have a nice warm baptistry. All sorts of people can do it. Let's talk. If you're an immersed believer in Christ, you're looking for a perfect church, homeless place, not it. We do serve a perfect God. We want to connect, we want to call, we want to cultivate, we want to meet new people. We want to share the gospel, we want to grow up while we do it. And we want to understand God the best way we can as a God of love and mercy at all times. As we stand and as we sing.